Yes.
How are you? Good.
Looking forward to learning.
Hopefully we'll have something to share. Try not to blind anyone with my funky socks.
You got some good funky socks.
No.
Fucking broad socks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to that point in life. Not rising with my wedding.
When somewhere along the way, somebody who wise in such things said, if you're ever a t-shirt almost every television production, if you ever offer makeup, don't decline.
Live and learn. You ready? Let's rock and roll.
Luckily, I spent a year coaching high school basketball and had to go out and buy a shirt and tie.
Yeah, I'm at that point in life where I'm hoping to be able to just get up in the morning, not worry about, okay, what suit and set I gotta put together, and just put on whatever I want to put on. Now, some people tell me I can do that now, but I don't think so.
It's so much dependent on what part of the country you live in.
That's true, that's true. And see, it's so hot in our area, if we could get away with that, I would.
Good afternoon.
Part of the country, and we can't.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. We have more people arriving, but they'll be ushered in. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Aspen Institute. On behalf of the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group and the Rural Development Innovation Group, I want to thank you for joining us today for this launch of our lunchtime dialogue series, America's Rural Opportunity. I want to thank all the people who are in the room here in Washington, D.C. with us, as well as the hundreds of people who are live streaming, and those of you who are watching on C-SPAN 3. So I wonder how many there are. I am Janet Topolsky. I'm Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group. And what we do here at Aspen CSG is we do a lot of work out in the country connecting, motivating, and equipping local leaders to build more prosperous regions and to advance those living on the economic margins while they do that. Since 1985, Aspen CSG has focused most of its work in rural America. And through our experience over those years, we have learned full well that rural America is not flyover country. Rural America, rather, is live in, work in, start a business in, and raise a family in country. So recent media headlines, as we all know, have focused attention on our nation's acute rural challenges: the decline of critical sectors, inadequate job opportunities, infrastructure challenges, community health crises, and more. Those are real. But a deeper understanding of rural America reveals an important but less publicized picture of innovation and collaborative local leadership using their local assets to turn challenges into opportunities. So, to launch this series today, we wanted to highlight just 3 representative stories of innovation that have built on local assets from 3 different parts of rural America. We're happy to be joined today by the people you see here on the podium, by rural business entrepreneurs and critical regional intermediary organizations that partner with them and are deeply engaged in rural economic development and building rural-urban connections. So before we get those stories and insights underway, I want to introduce Rob Riley, who's president of the Northern Forest Center. And the Northern Forest Center and Rob are who really instigated the development of the Rural Development Innovation Group. So he's going to tell you what that group is. Rob?
Thanks, Janet, and thank you all for joining us today. I am Rob Riley, president of the Northern Forest Center. The center works across a 30 million acre northern forest region of northern New England and upstate New York. building economic and community vitality while fostering sound forest stewardship. Our work over the past 20 years has focused on helping local communities to transition a rural economy that was once dominated by one sole industry, pulp and paper, to a more diversified one that can capitalize on the still important industry but secure broader economic prosperity in other industries that capitalize on our natural resource base. This transition has been long and painful, but also very inspiring. Back in late 2015, on the veranda of the Mount Washington Hotel, anyone been there? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Come back, we like you to come back. The idea of the Rural Development Innovation Group was born. It was clear to many of us that there was a need to more intentionally focused interest and investment on rural development. We were tired, if not exhausted, by the storyline that Janet mentioned of challenge and economic distress that dominated rural, and wanted to create a new narrative, one that positions rural as a national asset that it is, while at the same time acknowledging the need for effective investment and innovation to unleash potential opportunity. With the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, we recruited a group of rural innovators to meet for a year, and it has been almost a year, to provide expert advice to each other to accelerate the impact of our own work, identify national trends and emerging opportunities for rural, troubleshoot strategies, and collectively learn together. And now we're highlighting innovative approaches and helping to inspire public sector and philanthropic decision makers to reconsider America's rural opportunity. The Innovation Group identified on your handout have invested their time and energy balancing the hard work, the really hard work they do back at home with the work they have there, raising up innovative practices and stories to help shape priorities to support rural opportunity. And lastly, I do want to say, on a slightly sentimental tone, but one laden with ultimate practicality, is that this is very personal work for many of us. Personally, I grew up working on my family's farm in southern Vermont that was hewed out of the woods 225 years ago. I cut my teeth really in fields, picking stones, working in the forests, and wondered what the future might be for my family and my community. I know I'm not alone with those challenges of what the future brings to improve rural places. So thank you all for being here. Janet?
Thank you, Rob. And we do want to acknowledge and thank several organizations for their inaugural support of this series. Besides our own group, Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, these include the Northern Forest Center, the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, Encourage Community Foundation in Wisconsin, the Lore Foundation, which partners with rural communities in the Intermountain West, and it also includes every member of the Rural Development Innovation Group, all of whom have contributed significant time and resources to the effort. Now, if you want to share your thoughts or you have any questions and you're not in the room, if you're out there in the Twitterverse or the universe, you can use hashtag rural innovation, which is right here next to me. Maybe you can see it. So if you have a question and you're not in the room, that's what you use to get the question. We have someone monitoring it. So when we have a Q&A section, you can we'll get your questions there. To learn more, get updates, or share your stories, and we'd love anyone to share stories of rural innovation, visit us at as.pn/rural, as.pn/rural, or follow us on Twitter at Rural Innovators. So let's get started. I'm going to hand the mic over to Ray Suarez, who will be moderating and probing today's panel. We were talking about what adjective to use. We didn't want to use veteran journalist, so I'm going to use been there, done that journalist, Ray Suarez, who was most recently the host of Inside Story, which is Al Jazeera America's daily news program. He spent 14 years as a correspondent and anchor of PBS NewsHour and more than 6 years as the Washington-based host of NPR's Talk of the Nation. So Ray, here's your chance to talk some with innovators from our rural nation.
And thank you very much. I want to apologize at the outset for the stereotypical thinking that went into tapping me as the moderator for this program, because after all, who else would you invite to do this but a Puerto Rican guy from Brooklyn, who as a resident of Washington, D.C., is living in the smallest jurisdiction he's ever lived in his life. But this is a topic of vital importance to me as well as to the country, so I'm happy to be here. Of all the splits and tears in the national civic fabric, there are few that are as vast and widening as that between America's metropolitan counties and rural counties. Winner-take-all marketplaces for investment, for attention, for preparation for the future have hardened, solidified the lines. And I think even the hardest of hardcore urbanites would agree that America's rural counties still need to be economically and socially coherent places that are able to provide for themselves and the people who make their homes there. School systems need to be funded. Roads need to be maintained. Courts and sheriff's departments need their employees paid. They are places of accumulated capital that needs to be maintained. And for that to happen, people need another microphone. And for that to happen, people need to be able to thrive in those places. And as we've heard, there are great ideas that are working in rural counties, and they are represented by my guests here today. To kick us off, we'll start with the Appalachian Partnership for Economic Growth and John Molinaro. John?
Thank you very much, Ray. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about our region. We are the third of Ohio that most people never thinks about, the Appalachian part of Ohio. About 18,000 square miles of rugged, heavily forested, resource-rich country. Culturally, and our population is both the way that you may think about an Appalachian population, one that struggles with poverty, many people with Scots-Irish roots, but then also a very growing population from other areas, immigrants, as well as a very substantial and expanding Amish population. The economy of Appalachian Ohio has always been focused on resource extraction and manufacturing, and that's still true today. We've gone through periods where our timber, our clay to make bricks, our iron ore, our coal were the drivers of the economy, and frankly, the drivers of building American cities in the East. Today's today where our shale natural gas continues to play a huge role, and we're seeing a major resurgence in our hardwood timber industry. We still have lots of extreme poverty, but it's mixed in with very highly skilled manufacturing workers and artisans who are trying to cope with the erosion of jobs in the factories and industries in the region. And we're beginning to see a rebirth. The coal and steel jobs have mostly been lost, but they're being replaced by jobs in the shale gas industry and in a resurgent wood products industry. Our story today is going to focus on that wood products industry in the region, our fine Appalachian hardwoods that we grow there, which because of some economic displacements in the Great Recession we just came through, are no longer primarily used in the region. 80% are exported in their lowest value forms as raw logs or green lumber. And Mike Workman from Contracts Furniture in McConnellsville is the leader of a group that's really taking that on and driving more value back into our communities through higher value use of those forest products. Mike?
Thank you, John. Thanks for being here, everyone in the audience. This is a 20-year story that's hard to tell in 5 minutes, but I'll do the best that I can. I worked for a furniture manufacturer in southeastern Ohio for about 20 years. And in 1994, the company was sold by our investment banking firm who owned us to a regional bank in Cincinnati. The reason the bank bought all of the assets of the investment company was to get a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. But they were not interested in manufacturing, had nothing to do with it. As a result, in 1995, they closed our factory and put 160 workers, including myself, on the street. We were all without jobs. After thinking about it, I decided that I'm going to start my own business this time around, and that was, in 1996. A partner and I, in our little town of McConnellsville, purchased at auction some of the equipment from our former factory, from my former factory, and we built an 8,000 square foot building and started manufacturing stools. And we hired 3 employees from our previous employer, and we went into stool production immediately. And it was a very easy business. It was almost like a hairpin. There wasn't a lot to go wrong with this kind of product. So life was good for a few years. And from 1997 to 2002, we concentrated just on stool production. And in 2003, I got a call from a gentleman most of you have heard of, and his name is Chuck Williams. And he's the founder of Williams-Sonoma. And I had gotten to know Chuck over the years I've been in business. And he asked me, "Workman, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Chuck, we're making stools for you. Got my feet on my desk. Life is good. We're shipping these to you every week, and really enjoying life." And he said, "Well, Workman," he said, "I want some tables." And I said, "Well, Chuck, we don't do tables. We're just doing the stools for you." He says, "You're not hearing me." He said, "I want tables and I want you to do them." So I said, "Okay, give me a couple of weeks, Chuck, and let me think about this." So I knew a lot of people in the industry, and I went through my list of people in Appalachia who were small manufacturers. They were backwoods people. They were not interested in marketing, not interested in product development or in sales. And I asked them if they would be interested in making custom furniture for me. And they said, yes, we would be very interested in doing that. So over the course between 2005 and 2009, we created or networked 20 factories in the Appalachian region to do custom furniture. And back in 2004, Chuck had asked me to do cabinets as well. So the answer was the same. I'll figure this out. In 2010, I got a call from Eric Berkman, who was the president of the Ohio Manufacturers Association. And Eric asked if I would go to the Amish country in Ohio and help 4 small family-owned factories find their way in product development, in design, marketing, sales, that kind of thing. They weren't really interested in that. They were only interested in manufacturing furniture. So I gave them some tips, find out about their business, steer them on the right course. And then Eric asked me on the way home, "Well, what did you think?" And I said, "I see a big opportunity here, Eric, that I think what you should do is network these people and brand it, this thing, Chiquita Banana." And he looked at me and he said, "Why don't you do it?" So that's what happened. And that was a catalyst. So Eric set up a meeting with the Ohio Department of Development. We received some grant money to vet this whole idea of networking, and we were looking at what model are we going to use here. Is it a cooperative? Is it a quasi-cooperative? How are we going to organize this? And we decided to organize it as a hub and spoke system, and it's been operating since 2011. In the last 6 years, our annual revenue has grown by 15% a year. We've increased our sales by $4 million. Our goal in 2020 is to increase it by an additional $6 million. And so far, we've impacted 300 incumbent workers, and we've created 100 new jobs from this effort.
So I think that the story that Mike tells has a couple of really telling points. First, it was the local entrepreneurial spirit that really made this thing work. But second, there came some critical points where some additional assistance were required. Mm-hmm. So the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Funds channeled through the state of Ohio helped pay for pulling together the plan to pull together these companies. Subsequent to that, there's been additional manufacturing extension support that has helped with workforce training. Mike mentioned that there are 100 new workers. Someone had to train those up to the skills needed specifically in these industries. Manufacturing extension helped with that. We've also gotten some Department of Labor funds to help with skill upgrades. And going forward, this is plugged into a larger regional innovation cluster initiative that was actually founded based on the principles of Mike's work to drive more value in the forest products cluster back through the supply chain and do higher value work in Appalachian, Ohio. So that regional innovation cluster is among a set of clusters SBA supports that in things like aerospace and advanced energy, we're focused on the product that people have been making things with since we lived in caves. But it's working and it's driving more value into the region. Ray?
Thank you for coming in on time. It's an example much to be emulated by other panelists. From Ohio, we'll move next to the state of Oregon, and we'll hear from Nils Christofferson of Woollahra Resources.
Thank you, Ray. It's a pleasure to be here today. Our story is a little different. It's a story about a public-private partnership that addresses the challenge of forest restoration and job creation across the rural West. And the innovation that we're going to talk about emerged in Northeast Oregon, a 3-county area nearly the size of New Jersey with less than 50,000 people. More than 50% of this land base falls within the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest. Our communities in that area have always been tied to the land. We're isolated communities, very far from urban centers and markets, but rich in natural and human capital. There may not be many of us, but there's a wealth of skills and knowledge, an enduring work commitment, and a commitment to land stewardship. The forest and wood products sector used to be the highest private sector payroll provider in the region, providing very high wages and good private health insurance. Most of those jobs were lost in 1995 when the mill shut down, following dramatic reductions in forest timber harvests. Profound impacts rippled across the communities. County services were cut, schools laid off teachers and programs. The hospital struggled to remain solvent as more and more patients came in uninsured. But this is not just another story of a mill closure. It's about the decline of U.S. Forest Service capacity and funding, as well as the decline in the condition and function of our national forests. In 1995, fire made up 16% of the Forest Service annual budget. Last year, it consumed over 50% of the annual budget. $1.3 billion were spent fighting fire. In some of the largest fires, the costs exceed $1 million an hour. Left unchecked, the situation will worsen. In just 10 years, it's predicted that 2 out of every $3 the Forest Service gets from Congress will be spent on fire programs. And those ever-increasing costs of fire come at a cost to the rest of the agency's programs. The restoration work that's needed to reduce the risk of fire is cut, as well as protection of watersheds, wildlife, cultural resources, the upkeep of infrastructure for recreation, and a whole slew of other programs that deliver value to the American public. Our innovation in Northeast Oregon responds directly to these challenges. It's a new business model that converts the byproducts of forest restoration and fuel reduction into value-added products, renewable energy, and new jobs. It creates a new market that helps pay for the cost of restoration and reduce the threat of fire. It highlights an important public policy and investment opportunity, one that generates significant local and national economic and environmental returns. It's an example of the rural development opportunity offered by a renewed investment in land stewardship. And to give that story, I'm going to hand it over to David Schmidt. He and his wife are the co-owners of Integrated Biomass Resources in Wallowa, Oregon.
Thank you, Nils. Yes, it's Nils and I have been working on this together for quite some time, over 10 years. And 7 years ago, Jesse and I moved to Wallowa County to start this business alongside with Nils's organization and really start addressing the challenges that Nils spoke about. So one of the questions we were asked was what catalyzed our innovation? And so to me, it was two things. It was an ecological need, which Neil spoke to, changing forest conditions, and the need for markets to be able to pay for the way for that forest restoration to be done. As Neil's mentioned, lack of budgets to actually get it done require that we find market incentives to be able to do that. So there was an ecological need, but it was the economic need. Forest restoration is expensive. How do we achieve it without having value-added markets to be able to pay for the material to get its way out? So that was one of the drivers. Federal land managers don't have the money to do the restoration without the revenue from byproducts. And then as we started to address that problem, another problem of economy comes into play, is that what do you do with a broad range of material? So you're restoring the forest, removing mostly small diameter timber that has low value, diseased timber, dying timber, many species, trying to get our forest back into a healthy situation. So it's not just that you have a material that you have to find value from, it's a wide range of material, and there's not just one product that can fix that. So as we started to look at and how do we innovate around this problem, part of the challenge was the products out there that people were looking at is how do we convert all this to electricity, because that's something that can use a lot of this and can make it and can make most of it into one product. Or lots of research was done into biomass ethanol as another energy product. And so we start to look at these big solutions, but none of them were actually getting it done. We knew that we needed to be able to have smaller value-added products that we could start extracting the best value from all parts of the resource that we were removing during restoration. So that's where our business and our innovation started, is we looked at opportunities to be able to take a mixed basket of wood and have multiple value-added products. So we started looking around the country, and I was working in technical assistance with small businesses across the West, and I saw lots of good examples. There's some post and pole mills that are taking small diameter timber and making agricultural products. There's firewood operations that are taking dying and diseased trees and making it into bundled firewood. There's some small sawmills going in that are taking some of the material and making timber. The problem is none of those were addressing the bigger issue of combining it all together. And all of them have waste, all of them have inefficiencies. And so our innovation is looking at it and not going at it from an economies of scale perspective, but what we call an economies of integration. So what are the benefits of integration? So reducing costs by reducing handling, avoiding replication costs. Every one of these small value-added businesses, if we're replicating the costs of having a yard, taking in logs, sorting those logs, having all the equipment to do that, you end up with replicated infrastructure costs. And then also increasing revenue streams by having multiple products, which helped us address some of the other issues, seasonality, some of the variability in markets. And so we wanted to have an integrated facility that could really take care of those things. 2007, we started, Jesse and I started the business in town buying the residuals from a post and pole mill that Nils' organization had started with some grant funding after the last mill had closed in town. So we started taking their residuals and making them into densified heat logs for heating systems. Soon we realized that still wasn't addressing the issue. There was still a wide range of products that we needed. We knew we needed to get on one site and get this integrated together. So we worked with the county to purchase the last existing mill site 5 years after it had closed, moved onto that site, and started to build out an operation where we now take in mixed material. So we're reducing costs in the woods. We can take in this mixed restoration material, and we start putting it into, we have 5 value-added product lines now. That mixed material enters our system. We reduce handling costs because it's never handled again by big equipment until it's in one of those 5 finished products. So we sort out saw logs that we send to a regional mill. We're lucky enough to still have a regional mill. And we sort out small diameter timber that we peel into poles and sell for agricultural markets. We make bundled firewood, and we debark all of our logs and use our bark in a bigger cogen, a new modern cogen system where we produce hot water that then is used to create electricity and to create heat for our kilns where we heat treat all of our firewood, and so we sell pest-free firewood across the west from our facility. So we're really using every bit of the product, and that's the key to our innovation, is being able to integrate so that not only are we creating extra efficiencies, we're also being able to utilize all of our materials. So the results and the discrete outcomes of our innovation is in those 7 years, we've created 25 jobs in our town of less than 1,000 people. We've developed markets that are driving the restoration. The first 5 years we were there, the Forest Service was only able to put up 2 small timber sales and restoration projects in our area. In the last 18 months, they've put up 6. The market is driving, making the incentives to actually be able to get the restoration done. And we're creating more jobs beyond our facility in land stewardship and in forest-based jobs, which also support other infrastructure jobs in our community. I would say the unique outcome of our innovation is, as Nils mentioned, a public-private partnership, is that the community recognized that they needed entrepreneurs. Jesse and I were that. We were willing to come in and dedicate our lives to making this business work. And so we couldn't do that without a community that was supporting us. And so what we've done is the community has stepped up. Our Resources, our county, has stepped up to be able to help us and make sure that we're there and have the support we need. And in turn, we've given some ownership in our company to allow Resources to recognize the importance of their support in our venture. And so it's a unique situation.
Thanks, David Schmidt. From Oregon, we'll go clear back across the continent to South Carolina. Bernie Mazik is with us from the South Carolina Association for Economic Development. Bernie?
Thank you and welcome. I bring you greetings from warmer climates where there are smiling faces and beautiful places. South Carolina is a great place to be. We have urban and rural areas that definitely have slight differences. In South Carolina, the unemployment rate in our 11 most distressed and rural counties averages 12%, which is twice that of the more developed and urbanized counties. Our state 3 most prosperous counties is home to 40% of the state's bank deposits. And what that translates into is that's where capital largely resides. Whereas the rural communities, the 11 most rural and distressed counties, is home to 4% of the state's bank deposits. At the same time, South Carolina is rich in land assets. Over 65% of our state is considered rural as far as land mass. Now, some may say that that is a challenge, but we see that as an area of great opportunity and innovation. One area that I'd like to talk about is Allendale County. If you live in South Carolina, oftentimes when you want to see and hear about the most distressed conditions in the state, you'll talk about Allendale County. Unemployment rate in that county is right around 10%. Population-wise, it's a little over 9,433 individuals. Allendale County is often seen as a place where educational challenges exist. But at the same time, Allendale County is rich in natural resources and cultural assets. The economic drivers in the county are largely forestry and agriculture. Unfortunately, Allendale County is separated from major urban centers because of how the transportation system aligns. At one time, Allendale County was an area where a local economy could thrive because it was a cut through between Savannah and Columbia and some of the more urbanized areas. But with the building of interstates that bypassed the county fell into economic hardship. The major areas of opportunities that we see there in Allendale County are focused on the local assets. And that's where we try to to drill down on our own innovations there. As I said earlier, it's abundant in natural resources, cultural assets, and opportunities to really mine the potential that exists there. A recent study from the University of South Carolina produced and one other thing I'll say about Allendale County, it's a majority African-American county. 73% of the population there is African-American, 25% Euro-American. So there's some historical qualities that exist there. Recently, the University of South Carolina produced a study, one that we have been hoping to be generated for some time, that looked at African-American tourism in South Carolina. And that study produced recently and released recently showed that African-American tourism in South Carolina was a $2.4 billion industry, just in African-American tourism in the state. So when you look at the cultural assets, the natural resources that exist throughout the state, but specifically in rural counties, we see that there's an opportunity for cultivating that. So I'd like to move to one of our organizations in Allendale County, and since I'm here by myself, you'll have to imagine Allendale County representative here. He can't fit on the stage, but he's actually here. So Allendale County Alive is a local community development corporation. It's a certified community development corporation, and I'll explain the significance of that shortly. That was created by the community because the community itself recognized that they had resources they wanted to cultivate, and they want to maximize the potential that exists in their county. And what has happened, the state also recognized that a lot of our distressed communities had resources, but without capital, they could not cultivate and receive investment in those resources. So the state created something called a Community Economic Development Tax Credit. And that tax credit incentivizes investment into local challenged communities, as long as there is a certified community development corporation or community development financial institution in that area. And Allendale County Alive is one of those certified organizations. Certification is done by our State Department of Commerce, and any investment, contribution, equity, or debt that is invested in one of these certified organizations, that individual, bank, or insurance company who makes that investment gets a 33% tax credit, state tax credit, on their investment. And what that has been able to do is to drive investment, private investment, into some of our more distressed communities. What Allendale County Alive was able to do was to use that tax credit to be able to secure property and buildings that are now enabling them to operate and to advance heritage tourism, affordable housing development, as well as cultural tourism. Allendale, as I mentioned earlier, most of our bank deposits and therefore our bank investments are in the more urbanized areas. Well, through CDFIs that exist in the state, those CDFIs have also been able to attract private capital, and therefore allowing them to lend capital to some of the more distressed areas. And recently, Allendale County Alive received a $61,000 loan to advance their work. So in South Carolina, what our state policymakers have recognized is the value of investing in rural and distressed markets. We have had companies, individuals, banks that have also invested in these markets using the tax credit as a means to do that. And but for the tax credit, those investments would not flow into those markets. To date, the tax credit program has directed over $15 million into these rural and distressed communities throughout the state, most of whom are rural and economically challenged communities throughout South Carolina. Now the tax credits have been exhausted, and we're engaged with our legislature now to up the ante. So we're in discussions with them of increasing the tax credit from 33% to 100%. The current tax credit program has an annual cap of $1 million. We're working with our state legislature to increase that to $5 million annually. Eventually, we'd like that to be a permanent tool within the state, and that's what our conversations are underway currently. We've received calls from investors, bankers, who are really interested in receiving that tax incentive in order for them to target investment in distressed areas. And so now that the tax credit, of course, is exhausted, we're getting more calls than ever because this is a unique tool that is enabling us to channel capital into economically challenged areas throughout our state. And Allendale County is one of those that is receiving private capital whereby they would not have received it before.
Bernie Mazik, thanks a lot. We're going to be taking your questions in just a short time, but we're going to keep the conversation up here a little longer. I'm glad you ended, Bernie, with the tax incentive program. It certainly makes sense on its face. Can you envision a time when Allendale County will attract that kind of investment without the tax credit, where the advisability of capital going there is self-evident and doesn't need the spur of a tax credit?
Oftentimes, investors are not going to be drawn to an area where they cannot immediately see a return on their investment. So what the tax credit does is it brings their attention to an area and gives them the opportunity to see what the investment opportunities exist there. That's why a certified organization is based in or serves that particular county so that they can package the assets that are there and put them in a package that an investor can see the return on their investment, as well as they get a tangible financial return from the state, but they could also get a monetary return from the investment. It is going to be below market. It's going to be patient capital that goes into the product, but they're going to receive what we call a triple bottom line. They're going to receive a return from the state. Depending on their investment, they may receive a return from the project, and they will also play a role in moving the economy forward in that local market.
If I'm sitting in Columbia with my green eye shade on, do the numbers work? If South Carolina has foregone a certain amount of tax revenue, can I make a case for foregoing that revenue in money I don't have to spend for various kinds of subsidies, social welfare payments, emergency aid to the people of that distressed part of the state?
Sure, because already the tax credit program is proven to have a 5-to-1 leverage average. Sometimes that leverage is higher in some other markets and a little bit lower in others, but on average a 5-to-1 leverage. You also are creating jobs in that local market and providing a return to the state. So yeah, the folk at the Department of Revenue with the green-eyed shades, they're measuring that as well. And they're seeing, when they see that return on investment, more importantly, the legislature sees that return on investment, and now they are happy to forego that potential revenue, realizing that they're getting more revenue on the other side. That also includes the local tax base, which is going to also help with funding local schools and so forth.
Sitting here as we are in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., we're just a short stroll from the agencies that could make your lives in the short term or the near term a little easier, a little harder, a little more promising. The SBA is not too far away from here, the U.S. Forest Service. Are there really easy fixes that the relationship with both your own state governments and the federal government are missing? Is there low-hanging fruit that really is kind of easily picked that's being missed right now?
That's certainly true. When you begin looking at the economic opportunities across rural America, there are many, many great opportunities that we miss simply because we don't have the initial investment of resources necessary to move to a state where they can sustain themselves. We've seen this, a good example for us in Eastern Ohio is in the area of infrastructure. We have many companies that are looking at globally where it makes the most sense for them to locate an operation. And Eastern Ohio is extremely competitive as a geographic location, but we have a shortage of infrastructure to support that. So, and the
And by infrastructure, you mean?
water, sewer, building sites that are capable of bearing lands. So in our region, if it's flat enough to build on, it's likely a brownfield. It's been built on before and had industry on it before. It's on a strip mine. It has an underground coal mine under it. It's in a floodplain, or it's in a landslide area. So we have billions in assets sitting in a trust fund for reclaiming strip mine land. And there's a proposal in Congress, the Reclaim Act, which would move some of that money out, but prioritize it for those sites that have the most economic development potential. That linkage between economic opportunity and that fund can create a situation that basically fixes the problem we have of not having property available when companies come calling wanting to create jobs in our community.
David, you re-inhabited a closed mill. That sounds like the perfect all-around win.
Yes.
Revitalizing already existing capital.
Yes, and there's a lot of it across, I know across the West there is, particularly sawmills in our forest industry, which has obviously suffered, especially in some of our rural national forest dependent communities over the last 20 years. And so those sites are available, and the help to get onto them is really important. Our county, for example, stepped up and bought the old mill site in our community and leased it to us with the agreement that we would purchase it back from them over time. We had a 5-year leaseback option, and we were able to buy the property back from the county by getting some new market tax credit lending within 18 months. And so the county recognized that for us to create jobs and grow our business in the community, we needn't be focused on infrastructure. We needed to focus on our processes to be able to create those jobs. So they stepped up and filled the gap. We were able to buy it back, but it was a perfect example of a public-private partnership to get that infrastructure in the hands of businesses without it becoming cumbersome.
Are there interoperability problems? Are there ways that the incentives provided in Washington and in your own states don't line up, or don't line up easily, or could line up better?
Yeah, I think there's one in particular, the Community Development Block Grant Program that we're involved with. For entitlement areas, which are usually the urbanized areas, the local government is able to design those very well for their local markets. But when you get to non-entitlement areas, those dollars go to the state, and then the state will design a master plan for that. Oftentimes the state master plan does not align with some of our local rural markets. And so we really want to see CDBG guidelines and directions to the state to be able to be a little bit more sensitive to what the needs are in the local market. We definitely support water and sewer projects, but there are also entrepreneurial opportunities that can be utilized and can be gleaned from using that program, as well as innovative programs and activities around youth entrepreneurship, workforce development, and so forth, that if we can get the CDBG program to be a little bit more directive as far as getting our state government to do that.
What's the end game? Are we trying to provide a maintenance dose of economic development to rural counties just to sort of keep them moving forward and keep them alive and keep them funded? Or are you trying to create places where people will move to, instead of just taking care of the people who are already there? Are you looking to something more ambitious than that?
Well, from my own experience, I spent 20 years working in western Minnesota in a region which was predicted today to be at about 175,000 people, and today it's about 215,000 people. And the reason for that is a focused 20-year effort to rebuild the local economy from the ground up, using local resources. And it turned around the migration pattern. It created more vibrant communities. It defied all of the expert predictions about continued rural decline. It is possible. There are examples where it's possible. It takes some flexible resources driven by a local vision of a path forward to make it happen, but it is very doable.
I have a point there too, Ray, please.
Sure.
The really important thing here, as far as I'm concerned as an entrepreneur, is to provide the opportunity for people to stay in their communities. So many times people have to move and leave the communities behind. And you see an erosion of the tax base, erosion of the infrastructure, all of those disastrous things start to happen. So by creating opportunities on the market side, the way I see things, and bringing work to the people, keeping them in their communities, then you not only stabilize their families, but you start to stabilize those communities as well. So if you can find a way to stop the exit of people from these communities, then I think you've gone a long way of rebuilding rural America.
Nils?
Yeah, and I mean, that's, when we got started in Wallowa County in 1996, the goal was to create jobs and create enough opportunities that kids came back to the schools. And that is happening. In 20 years after the mill shut down for the first time in 20 years, and I've been on the school board for 12, the school population is growing in Wallowa County, and it's a real point of pride and excitement within our community. And our community is, there is so much natural resource wealth, and as I said before, so much ingenuity and human capital. And people want to work. They don't want a maintenance dose of federal funding and support. They want to work. And there's tremendous opportunities beyond, we're working with farmers and ranchers across the county, developing microhydro systems and irrigation efficiency programs to create efficiencies in water use and energy use that improve on-farm incomes and farm values. We're working with contractors in the woods to look at different systems of running their business and diversifying their business, so they're no longer just harvesters, but they're stewardship contractors that are doing a full suite of watershed restoration work in addition to the timber harvest work. And that's what we're trying to build, is a stewardship economy, one that is rebuilding soil, rebuilding forest health, while still creating some of the products that society needs, whether that's food, fiber, or energy.
Bernie?
Ray, and I also see people attracted to a place of areas that have a sense of place. Areas that are clearly, you hear the diversity right here, where a community has a sense of place and a sense of identity and celebrates that, and then has the ability to attract the resources to grow that in such a way that people can understand the value of that sense of place. They're attracted to that area, and thereby you can attract folk that align with that sense of place and bring their resources and their talents to that area. So the kinds of tools that we use, whether it's federal resources or state resources, are all aligned to do that, is to help strengthen that sense of place and grow it so that others will be attracted to it as well.
I'm going to tell you guys a dirty little secret. From the urban side of the divide, it's taken as an article of faith that because of the way our politics are structured, rural areas have disproportionate pull in the national dialogue. If you look at the United States Senate, there's the state of California with 40 million people, and the 17 nearest states have 41 million people, and of course, 17 times as many United States senators. How come politics and the way state legislatures and the national legislature is structured haven't been able to champion some of the interests that we've heard discussed in this conversation so far?
It is, I think, the checks and balances that are built into our political system. So on the one hand, you might think that with the majority of America's population being urban, that the majority of the power would be there. And certainly if you look at the House of Representatives, that's the case. If you turn that around and you look at the Senate, the idea was to in having a Senate that was based on states versus based on population was to avoid what I believe was talked about in the Federalist Papers as the tyranny of the majority. So on the one hand, you have geography being the defining factor for power. On the other hand, you have population. The balance between the two should lead to more balance in American affairs. And generally, it probably is the reason that much rural America hasn't been abandoned altogether.
How come we've held on to so many counties in America that have been depopulating, that are adjacent to depopulating counties, where they might very profitably combine their sheriff's departments, court systems, county jails, school systems, and yet they hang on as revenue centers, as centers of employment? Might you guys be helping your own cause with a rationalization of rural government across the country?
Well, a lot of these counties were developed for political reasons, and I know in South Carolina, they have such a strong sense of identity that they do not want to lose that sense of identity. Now, what we've attempted to do in South Carolina is operate on a more regional approach where counties are working together. But those lines and those jurisdictions still exist. And yes, you still have to have more than one fire department, more than one sheriff's department, but there's the beginning of economies of scale where they're beginning to collaborate more. But a lot of it is you're touching the third rail, and that's all about who I am. And
Yeah, but if you want a subsidy, I think we got to touch the third rail. You know.
Well, Ray, there's another point to that too. We do work on a regional basis from my seat and from what we do. It's not just a county effort here. And we don't really have the time, nor do we have the interest. I personally don't have the interest in fighting political battles to get the economics done in our area. So for that reason, we go straight to the core of the problem. We look at ways to solve it on a regional scale. And actually, the things that we're doing, the model that we've built and the hub and spoke system, actually is transparent and transferable. And I've talked to people at the federal level about taking this idea to the rest of Appalachia and other craft industries like clay, like glass, and leather, and fabrics. And I think it's starting to happen in North Carolina now in the fabric industry, as I understand it. So this is not a county by county effort. It is a regional effort, and it's a huge, wide swath of the region. We're talking about 13 states here in America.
And frankly, Ray, I don't know a rural county in America that does it all on their own. Almost every rural county is collaborating with a nearby county. Almost every rural city is collaborating with nearby rural cities in order to bring the services that they need in order to get things done. Can or should we get rid of those old political units that were based on how far a wagon can travel in one day? I'm not able to fight that battle. That said, when we work on economic development in Eastern Ohio, I critically need local partners who understand the geography, understand the entrepreneurs, understand the building sites, can work on getting the infrastructure in place. That said, if you're in a town of 500 people or 5,000 people in Appalachian, Ohio, you can't effectively market that place to, say, a business in the wood products industry in the European Union that's looking at a location closer to their source of hardwood supplies to operate. So we work on a hub and spoke basis, even in economic development, to get the job done. So it's not like we're sitting there in our castles and barring the doors. We are already collaborating and innovating. Have we been able to do that on every level? Is every unit of government in rural America rational? No, but I could say the same thing about every metropolitan area in America.
I'm sure you've been thinking of your brief, direct, and elegantly crafted questions. And we will move on to questions from the audience now. And your hand shot up right away, Secretary, the former Kansas Senator and Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman.
Well, thank you. This is a great panel, and the entrepreneurship and spirit of local development is just amazing. And I would just, one comment and then a couple questions. The comment is that one of the problems that happened with rural America is largely rural America and policy affecting rural America up until about 1950 was strictly agricultural. And maybe even until 1960. And the bulk of that agriculture was the commodity crops of wheat, corn, cotton, rice, and soybeans. Timber was a little bit different, but it was viewed as a crop. And agriculture has changed so dramatically, and it's depopulated because of production increases and productivity and other kinds of things, that we're left with a depopulated area, but the programs were designed for an area populated by farmers. And now it's just much different than it used to be, and that's the challenge, Ray, as to making these political decisions. But we're probably not going to change the Constitution in the short term. So maybe the president might want to change it, but the rest of us probably don't want to change it. So, but I would ask you how much. You talked about the Forest Service. You talked about state tax credits. The federal government pumps a huge amount of money into rural America. It's not, I mean, in fact, one could argue it's almost disproportionate through water and sewer grants, business and industry loans, and infrastructure. It's very, very significant, the amount of dollars that comes in. Some of it goes directly to the states. Some of it's administered by the USDA. Most of it's the USDA, a little SBA. Most of it's the USDA in this regard. Does it work? Does it help you do what you want to do? Does it need to be spent in a different way? I mean, there are billions and billions of dollars every year flowing into rural America from Uncle Sam. Is it being spent the right way? Does it help you?
The short answer to all of that is yes. In some ways, the federal dollars do work. They do help. But as I said earlier, sometimes we need it directed in a more strategic way. It needs to be directed with more voice from the local community. And you may say that that exists, but we really need to have that pushed down even further. It also needs to be more accessible directly to organizations that are closer to the ground. Now you might say local government is that entity. But a lot of times local government in some of our rural communities and our small towns don't have the capacity to access those dollars. So that requires either some capacity building or structuring the dollars in such a way that that local community, that local town can access them and really put them to work. So yes, we have many programs that are working very well, but we still have some ways in which we need to structure federal programs so that they can go directly into the local community, utilized by the local units of local governments, nonprofits, hospitals, and so forth. That's going to be a more efficient and effective way of mobilizing local assets and capacities.
I can only speak to the sector that I'm in, and as Nils mentioned earlier, the disproportionate amount of money that's being spent on fighting fires, and it absolutely dwarfs the amount of money that we're putting into actual restoration that could mitigate some of that. And being a business that is in the business of that, we are continually frustrated by seeing those dollars flowing to stop fire or to fight fires when we're on the ground trying to actually stop them and create forest health. I think one of the things that we see with a lot of programs is, and I know the reasoning why, but sometimes we try to get big cure-alls. So we want to have huge impact. Yeah. So let's just focus on one big thing that gets big impact. And I see it in our industry. I was talking earlier about biomass ethanol, for example. Well, we want to fix the forest in one fell swoop. So let's invest tens of millions of dollars in research on one thing that we think can fix it all. When we're seeing small dispersed solutions that are working, that in the 15 years that we're spending trying to find the one big thing, we could be doing many dispersed things that actually are making big impact.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jose Colucci from the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. I'm the Southeast Manager. First, let me congratulate the Aspen Institute and the panelists for having a great conference without PowerPoint. It's very refreshing. Moving along, I got a question actually for Dave Schmidt. I'm very interested in you probably answered some of it now, but I'm very interested in the billion-ton initiative by DOE and USDA. And since you know biomass that's the phrase I use, and you already talked about the ethanols and all this, I imagine you have looked at it, for the next step, since you already know how to handle it. What are challenges that you see right now for you to move to that next level? Because I'm looking into that for the Southeast, thinking, we know biomass in the Southeast. What would need to happen to be able to start looking into that new economic development?
Yeah, I mean, Eastern Oregon is about a little bit over 50% of the area is federal land, but over 70% of the forest falls within our national forests. And the capacity has declined substantially over the last 20 years to manage that. And in Wallowa County alone, there's about 112,000 acres that broad scientific consensus says is in real need of restoration, and we're accomplishing about 1,500 acres a year. And that has impacted everything that David and I have done, because some of the solutions that look good on paper when you're just crunching numbers become incredibly difficult to realize when you think about the uncertainty of the feedstock supply, the availability of supply coming off the federal land. So trying to figure out a way to achieve more consistency and continuity in the pace and scale of restoration on federal land, trying to get the country to accept that this is important work, that it is important to the health of the national forest and to reinvestment in all the other things that the national forest does for the public, but that it adds that extra benefit for our communities of jobs and income. That's a key constraint to us. The other thing is just because we operate in, Wallowa County's got 2.2 people per square mile. We operate in a very dispersed geography with very long haul distances and steep mountainous and canyon terrain. So the cost to get fuel to a site often exceed some of these big scale solutions. David mentioned that we looked at 5 and 10 megawatt plants, power plants, and we could have easily fed that. That was within the scale of our feedstock, but they needed fuel to come in at $8 a green ton. At that time, we would not be able to deliver it for less than 25, right? So those challenge some of these bigger ideas.
Using the hashtag rural innovation, some questions have been coming in, and Janet has those.
Okay, so let's start with this one. How do the rural innovators here think about job quality as part of the economic development efforts? Job quality.
Great question.
Great question.
Yeah.
John?
Well, so job quality is absolutely critical, and we focus on that every day in our work. Most of the tools that we use to help encourage development won't, for instance, invest in anything that creates a job at less than 1.5 times federal minimum wage. That said, and that's still a relatively low level, but that said, in my experience, until you begin to soak up your labor surpluses, your job quality will not go up. So once you get to the point where you're approaching 5% unemployment, then you start to see economic pressure to increase the quality of jobs. So it's a bit of a yin and a yang. A company is not going to pay more than the prevailing wage for labor with a particular set of skills in an area. And so until you can get enough volume going to bring that unemployment rate down to a point where your workforce begins to be a little competitive, your wages aren't going to go up.
And that's roughly $22,000 a year for a full-time employment.
Right.
Can you live on that in Eastern Ohio, Southeastern Ohio?
So if you have 2 people in the family working full-time, that will bring you above the federal poverty threshold for a family of 4. Not the greatest living, but frankly, the cost of living in rural areas tends to be substantially lower.
82%, the national average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's a two-part situation. Number one, I would say that investing in our education and in our entrepreneurial development in
Yes.
rural communities is a big part of it.
That's correct.
Because we've talked about the brain drain. We've talked about people having to move to urban centers because there's no jobs for them, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people have left. So we need to reinvest in that to get people to be able to stay. And that's the other part of it, is that we have a lot of people that want to stay.
Yes.
We're in communities where people want to stay there. We have a lot of employees that are excited about the jobs we have there because they're in the sector they want to. They want to be working in the forest industry. They want to be able to be outside. They want to be working in that. And so being able to create opportunities for them to stay is really important. And so investing in that education, but also investing in so quality of jobs, a lot of it is lifestyle too. And we're creating opportunities for people to work in sectors that they want to be in.
And lots of people who want to move back. I mean, so when we manage to develop a good paying job in our region and the company's worried that they're not going to find somebody with a technical skill set or a professional skill set, there are almost always people from that area who left for opportunity with that skill set willing to come back.
And I think one of the other issues too, Ray, is and rather than throw money at the problem, at these issues that I see going on all the time from the federal and the state level, I think it would behoove us all to think about what can we do at our local level to make a difference. And sometimes a small pebble can make a lot of waves in a pond. And in our case, if we would have listened to the outside world where I'm from, we would never have tried, even attempted to create a creative business. Those are in Atlanta, those are in New York City, those are everywhere but Morgan County, Ohio, or other small counties like ours. But we've proven the point that our people are creative. We have to reach in the woods to find them and attract them to our business. But what we've done that we don't need any government help with is we have taken away the ceiling on their earnings. So talk about the quality of your job when you go and do what you want to do and are paid to your potential. That is a quality that isn't often found, and that's what we've been able to do in our rural community. We offer even our hourly people in our creative office a profit sharing bonus. So they become part of the organization. I think these are the kinds of efforts that are grassroots and are very simple, and they don't need a lot of money thrown at them. It's just, it takes leadership and it takes entrepreneurship to make this work.
Who's next? Over here.
It was. Now it's on. Hi, I'm Renee Bryce Laporte. Hello, John. I guess you would just interested to hear from you guys, for the new jobs that are being created, what kind of educational preparation do folks need to be able to successfully work those jobs?
I would like to address that for 1 second. Educational level, that's kind of a soft area here. What's really going on in America is the lack of a work ethic, regardless of your education. And we've lost that somewhere along the line, and at the family level, at the community level, I don't know at what level. But we found in what we've done in Ohio is we've concentrated on working with the Amish and the Mennonite community, where the work ethic is part of their way of life. And John has helped us create an educational program with Washington State College in Marietta to do training for people. And our idea here is to take the work ethic element and make it transferable to the English workforce if possible. But we don't know that yet. It's still an experiment. But I think these are the kinds of innovative things at the local level that we can do to make a huge difference and make the pebble make even bigger waves.
And just a point of clarification, the English are what the Amish call the rest of us.
I would say that part of it goes back to jobs that people enjoy doing, and tapping into the things that people like. In our rural communities, a lot of people are there for a reason. So for us, working in natural resources, people are there because they want to do that. Jessie's here, and she spends a lot of time with our employees. Sometimes I want to be like, Jessie, don't encourage them, because we like to keep our good employees, but we spend a lot of time with them finding out, what do you want to do? What do you want to go to college for? A lot of times in our rural communities, kids don't know what they want to do when they get out of school. So they need to spend some time figuring out what drives them, what they're passionate about, and then identifying that and being able to invest in that. So investing in workforce development is an important part for our business.
Absolutely.
So we do lean manufacturing training and other things to try and find that thing that inspires people to be able to say, this is a direction I want to go. I think that's an important piece.
And it's also a difference between, not difference, but education and training. You have education, oftentimes persons think immediately that's a college or a graduate degree. There's really training. One of the programs that we operate is called the Individual Development Account Program, IDA program, where individual can save to acquire an asset. One of the assets is an education, and that's a match savings program. Well, most of the individuals that go through that program for education, they're going for training. Now, some of that is for professional training in barbering, beautician, welding, something that they enjoy. So you have education, you have training, and I think it's also making training and education accessible to persons, because not everyone is aligned to go to college or be in that environment. So as we create training opportunities that are closer to the community, grounded in the community, that aligns with the values and the passion of the people there, I think we won't have an issue where persons cannot find work because they're not skilled. And I think that also feeds to the work ethic, because most persons that we may think have lost the work ethic is just because they've not been exposed to what the opportunities are. And so what we try to do is, first of all, affirm them that they have something within them that can produce for themselves, their family, and the greater community, and then work with them to find what that is, and then provide the tools so that they can capitalize and maximize that.
Bernie, at the outset, you told us that the unemployment in your county was twice the level that it is in the state. Mm-hmm. To sop up some of that excess labor, where would you train your fire as far as the amount of education, the amount of training you need for these jobs? And once people have some experience and some skills, are there ladders that allow them to stay in the area? More skilled, better paid work that they can move to over time?
Well, some of what is happening in Allendale County is helping persons to understand what resources are there and what potential entrepreneurial opportunities are there, and how they can position themselves to be a participant in that environment, and then bringing the training resources to them so that they can transition from the unemployment roles to the employment roles. So it takes some time, because my state is aligned very strongly on what we call smokestack chasing. So a lot of the economic development agenda is focused on that. We're trying to help right-side that a little bit so that they'll also invest more in entrepreneurial development, place-based development, so that in those counties that's not going to be able to attract a Boeing plane manufacturer, they can generate alternative industry, and from that attract a manufacturer that aligns with the natural resources that are there.
Next.
Yeah, in case this is sort of a segue question. There was a question from California R&M Consulting. How are you reaching out to youth to cultivate a future generation willing to work and live in rural? Bernie, you began to answer that, but is there anything else the rest of you are doing?
Well, our resources have been running a research and education program with broad outreach, both within the K-12 programs, because most of the schools in Eastern Oregon are on a 4-day school week. So we started offering an outdoor natural resource education program on Fridays, and extended that to the universities and create a variety of internships as well. But I think this idea of kind of continual workforce development and training is the more important one. Wallowa County has the highest rate of self-employment in the state of Oregon. And people there are used to trying to create something on their own. One of the things that you hear over and over again is that the younger generation has less direct experience than the preceding one that grew up on a farm or grew up with a family that was working in the woods and using these as tools, as key tools to work. And trying to figure out how we create those opportunities again so that there's the ability to use both your head but to use your hands and figure out the best way to build a trail, to build a fence, to cut a tree, fell a tree, skid a tree, whatever it is, that we're losing some of that, and we want to create more opportunities for kids to do that. So some of the older generation, we're actually talking about on the largest abandoned mill site, beginning to create a sort of applied training area for kids to get more involved in that, and also talking with the vets, the returning vets, to be involved in some of this work that could immediately go back to work doing a whole range of things on the National Forest System, starting with simple things like rebuilding trails to doing some of the thinning work that we talked about earlier.
And in our case, with the certification training program that John has worked on with our local community college, the idea here is to have a board certified at the state level program that can articulate. So we've created an 18-hour curriculum for job training and skill training that will articulate if the student wants to go for an associate's degree or on beyond that. That's one path, that's an option for them. If they want to go into the workforce, they're now prepared to do that, and we're creating resources in manufacturing for those jobs to be open for them when they do come through the school. And we are supporting that with, we created a philanthropical base in our community that we can support scholarships and support the educational cost for those students. So there's no reason that our kids in our area have to be on the streets. This is the best anti-drug campaign that I can ever think of here. That would get them in school, get them trained, get them in the workforce, or on for further education.
And not abandon them at that point.
And not abandon them.
One of our initiatives, which has been extremely successful, is something we call Upskill, which works with employers to identify people at those lower tiers in their company who can do better, who are great employees, but they don't have the next skill to advance. With a Department of Labor training grant, we were able, for an average of $600 per person, help that individual move up into that next skill, which allowed them to be promoted, which also opened their position for a new entry-level person. We managed to train, place more people with that model than the other 10 Make It in America workforce grants combined. That we're focusing on pre-employment training. It's a very cost-effective way to meet your skill needs and keep your workforce moving up.
Is that proprietary?
No, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
One of the metrics that big city mayors throw at each other when they talk about vitality and job growth and healthy economies is how many immigrants come to my metropolitan area. And if you look at the SMSAs with the least immigrant inflow, they tend to be some of the least healthy metropolitan areas in the country. Are rural areas in America just out of this conversation, not even in it, when a tremendous share of the people who come to America from other parts of the world are rural people?
Well, I have one story, but it kind of encapsulates at least the experience in South Carolina. We recently swore in a new U.S. Secretary to the UN, Nikki Haley, who's former governor of South Carolina, who, of course, was born in South Carolina, but her parents were immigrants from India. They moved to a rural area, Bamberg, Barnwell area of South Carolina. And they started an enterprise there. So rural areas is rich for immigrants that have been able to create an opportunity for themselves, a life for themselves, and then able to grow and prosper from there. So that's one story that shows the opportunity that exists, but you can aggregate that up with numbers as well.
Yeah, there are many parts of rural America where there is population growth going on, fed by immigrants. In the Great Plains, there are many communities. You can go into communities in rural Nebraska that are growing again because of immigrants moving into the communities. You can go into rural communities in the Southwest that are growing and thriving and doing better because of immigrants coming up through the Americas. It's the immigration issue and the immigration opportunity hasn't bypassed rural America. It's as much a part of rural narrative as it is urban narrative. It's just not told as often.
So I think we have time for one more question. I mean, we have a lot coming in. Oh, I had him in the queue, sorry. We have a lot coming in we won't have time for, but here you go.
Thank you. My name's Dan Neff. I actually work here in Washington with the Appalachian Regional Commission. I worked with Mike way back when in Ohio in the 90s and really applaud his work and the catalyst he's been for that part of the state over the years. My question is really kind of simple, and you kind of all been addressing it to some degree, but obviously we've just completed a very contentious election cycle, and we have a new administration, and rural America was very much behind the new president and what he proposes to do. If you had access to his Twitter account and you knew he was going to look at what you were going to say, what recommendations would you make to this administration as to what they could do to better help rural America and to deal with issues and problems perhaps in a more holistic manner?
He does go on every day, so he would see it.
I mean, you know, again, sitting in far eastern Oregon, we are desperately hoping that thoughts about infrastructure go beyond traditional infrastructure of roads, bridges, highways, schools, and think about natural resource capital and the infrastructure that exists across our public lands in general, that has a deferred maintenance account that exceeds $20 billion and a tremendous amount of opportunity to put people back to work, restoring that infrastructure and that asset that has long served the public. So that's a key piece. The second thing would be to just make sure that, as David was getting to before, that we're not looking for just nice, big, splashy investments that get you headlines, but we're thinking about how do you package the programs that are the right size and scale with the right flexibility for small rural communities across the country.
This may go counter to some of the narrative that we're hearing out there, but for one thing, I would really like to see our administration understand the impact of uncertainty on opportunities related to international trade and the impact that that's having in rural areas. I currently have 40 international companies that are actively considering the possibility of making an investment that would create jobs in our region. All of them have been on hold since the election because they don't understand the impact of the election on the operating environment. So I would urge our administration and Congress to make it clear that foreign companies that want to create jobs in America are welcome here, and that the trade barriers that might prevent them from having a successful business operation in America aren't going to get in the way.
I would encourage him or help to inform him that rural America is very diverse, that there are a variety of groups, ethnic groups and others that live in rural America that really help to shape who rural America is. And so with that diversity lies many opportunities. And so to think about the diversity and help inform him of the diversity of rural America and how those cultural assets can play a role in promoting economic opportunity in our rural communities.
I would like to, excuse me, go ahead. I would like to ask the president to not pay so much attention to Wall Street and Main Street, but pay more attention to the country roads. That's where the jobs are being created at the entrepreneurial level. And 70% of new employees in this country are hired by entrepreneurs. And I think it would behoove the president to take a look at that and see how he can support more, less regulation, more support for small businesses in America.
And I would add one last thing, is that it might be counterintuitive, but I think there's large parts of rural America that actually are starting to partake in a stewardship economy and really want to have a stewardship economy, actually care about the land that they live on. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive that we are against regulation and climate change and so on, when really not all of rural America wants to be in an extraction economy. There's a lot of rural America that really would like to be part of a stewardship economy.
Good point.
Well, I'm told that he watches a lot more CNN than C-SPAN 3, but just in case he was watching, that's a good set of messages to end on. One of the most important jobs of a moderator is to get off on time, and we just did that. Janet?
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank Ray Suarez as well as all of our panelists, and you're welcome to chat with them afterwards if you wish. I saw more hands up, so I know there's at least some detailed questions some of you have. Just two things. I want to remind you that we are actually very actively interested in collecting more stories of rural innovation. So if you have any of those, please do either share them with us via a link at Twitter at Rural Innovators, or you can visit us at as.pn/rural. And finally, I want to thank you all for being here, those virtually in the live stream, C-SPAN, as well as in the room, and invite you all back to our front porch for the next segment of America's Rural Opportunity, which will be on March 17th here, and we're going to be focusing on entrepreneurship in rural America. Thank you very much.
Great job. Thank you, Ray. Wonderful story. Pleasure to meet you. Yeah. Pleasure to meet you.